Some mornings arrived with the specific quality of having been waited for. Not anticipated, anticipation carried a kind of tension in it. A leaning forward, a breath held. This was different. This was the feeling of something that had been moving toward you for a very long time finally arriving at exactly the right pace and sitting down beside you without requiring any explanation of the journey. It was a Saturday, 3 weeks after the Tuesday that changed everything. The apartment had settled into itself in the way that spaces did when people stopped being careful about occupying them and simply began living. Mila's cream-heeled boots were by the door beside Josio's dark shoes and Jum's smaller polished ones, 3 pairs in a row that had not been arranged by anyone but had simply arrived in that configuration because that was where people put their shoes when they came home. As things had migrated from the nursery into the general consciousness of every room. A small blanket on the sofa arm, a soft toy on the kitchen counter that nobody remembered placing there, the particular occupation of a baby who was not yet mobile but whose presence had thoroughly colonized every surface regardless. The Han River was doing what it always did outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, slow and permanent and catching the morning light the way it caught every light, without preference, without performance. Mila was in the kitchen. She was in a deep ivory wrap blouse and wide-legged camel trousers and flat ivory leather shoes, the Saturday version of herself, still elegant, still deliberate, but softer in the fabric and the color, the version that existed when the boardroom was not the destination. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. Back to loose. She had decided the low bun belonged to the day of reckoning, and that day was finished and done, and she was returning her hair to where it wanted to be. She was making coffee. Real coffee. Not the hospital machine variety that Jum had delivered with professional embarrassment 3 weeks ago, but the kind that required attention and a specific grinder and the small copper pot that she had found in the kitchen cabinet on day 2 of living here and had asked Josio about, and he had said, "It was my mother's," and she had treated it with the specific reverence that objects earned by being someone's mother's. She ground the beans. She filled the copper pot. She stood at the counter and watched the Han River through the kitchen window and felt, for the first time in 7 years without qualification or condition or the awareness of a threat somewhere in the architecture of the feeling. Safe. Simply that. Safe. Welcome to Black Silk Stories, the home of Afro-Korean stories that hit different. Subscribe, drop a comment, and do not go anywhere. This is the final episode of Daddy I Found Them, and we are going to land this story exactly where it deserves. Jum appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:40. He was in a deep navy suit, the specific navy of a Saturday that still required a suit because Jum on a Saturday still required a suit the way the Han River on a Saturday still required being the Han River, with a white dress shirt and dark shoes and his dark hair neatly combed and his hands at his sides and his dark serious eyes finding Mila at the counter with the copper pot. "That smells different," he said. "Good different or bad different?" Mila said without turning around. He considered this seriously. "Better different," he said. "Your grandmother's pot," Mila said. "Your father told me it was hers." Jum came into the kitchen and stood beside her at the counter, not at the table, beside her at the counter, and looked at the copper pot with an expression she was learning to read as the one he wore when something had just become more significant to him than it was 30 seconds ago. "He keeps it," Jum said. "Every time we move he brings it. It is always the first thing unpacked." "Yes," Mila said. "That sounds like him." Jum looked at her. "You know him," he said. It was an observation rather than a surprise, the tone of someone filing a confirmation of something they already understood. "I used to," Mila said. "I am learning him again." "Is it different?" Jum asked. "The second time." She looked at him. At the navy suit and the serious eyes and the round soft cheeks that were still entirely a child's and would be for a while yet, whatever the rest of him insisted on being. "It is more," she said. "The second time is always more. Because you already know the shape of something and you get to discover that the shape held." Jum considered this with the focused attention he brought to things worth considering. "Like cartography," he said. "How?" Mila said. "You map something once," he said. "And then you go back and the territory has changed but the essential lines are the same. The rivers are where you left them. The mountains have not moved." Mila looked at her son. Then she looked at the Han River through the window. "Yes," she said quietly. "Exactly like that." The coffee was ready. She poured 2 cups, a full one for herself and a smaller one for Jum, because Jum had asked for coffee at breakfast 3 days ago with the straightforward certainty of someone who had decided they were ready for coffee, and Josio had looked at Mila and Mila had looked at Josio, and they had both understood that arguing with this particular child about this particular decision was not how either of them wanted to spend a morning. and she handed the smaller one across. Jum accepted it with both hands. He took a sip. He considered it carefully. Better than the hospital machine, he said. Considerably, Mila said. They stood at the counter together drinking coffee in the Saturday morning kitchen with the Han River through the window and the copper pot between them and the apartment quiet around them, and it was ordinary. Completely ordinary. The specific ordinary of a Saturday morning that had been waited for without knowing it was being waited for, and had finally arrived. Hoseo came through at 8:15. He was in dark trousers and a white linen shirt. No suit jacket, no tie, the Saturday version of himself that Mila had not seen before these 3 weeks and had been quietly cataloging alongside everything else she was relearning. And his hair was slightly less perfectly swept than it was on working days, which was the only concession the morning had extracted from him and which he found, privately, entirely disarming. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Jum and Mila at the counter with their coffee cups. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, not the assembled expression of a man in a meeting, but the unguarded expression of a man who has walked into a room and found something in it that he did not know he was going to find and is simply having the feeling of it without managing it first. The copper pot, he said. Yes, Mila said. I hope that is all right. Yes, he said. It is more than all right. He came to the counter. He poured himself coffee. He stood beside Mila, on her left, Jum on her right, and they stood at the counter together, the three of them, drinking coffee on a Saturday morning while Siowa slept in the nursery and the Han River moved outside and the city did its unremarkable weekend business below. Nobody said anything for a while. Nobody needed to. Siowa woke at 9 with her characteristic announcement. The preliminary small sounds followed by the full declaration that the morning had arrived and she had opinions about it. And Mila went to her and brought her back to the sitting room where the Saturday arranged itself with the unhurried ease of people who had been in the same space long enough that the space had learned their preferences. Hoseo took Siowa while Mila finished her coffee. He held her with the ease of a man who had done this before, 7 years before, with another child, and Siowa looked at him with the focused intensity of a baby conducting a thorough assessment of the person holding her and arriving, apparently, at a satisfactory conclusion because she settled against his chest with the specific trust of someone who had decided this was acceptable. Jum watched this from his chair with the cartography book, open today, actually being read, and said without looking up, "She likes you." "Yes," Hoseo said. "She did not like Beck," Jum said. "When he held her on Thursday she made her objection known." "Beck has that effect on people initially," Hoseo said. "I will tell him you said that," Jum said. "You will not," Hoseo said. "No," Jum agreed. "I will not." Mila watched the three of them from the sofa, the man holding the baby, the boy with the book, the Han River moving behind them all, and thought that this was the thing nobody told you about the end of a very long difficult chapter. They told you about the resolution, the justice, the restoration. They did not tell you about the Saturday mornings after, about the copper pot and the 3 coffee cups and the baby deciding Beck was unacceptable. About the specific weight of a morning that required nothing of you except to be in it. She had built an empire to survive. She had not known she was also building toward this. It was Jum who made the move at 10:30. He closed the cartography book. He set it on the chair arm with the cover face up. He stood up and smoothed the front of his navy suit jacket with both small hands in the particular way he smoothed things before something important. And he looked at his father in the chair across the room with Siowa settled against his chest. "Daddy," he said. "Yes. I have a question." "Then ask it," Hoseo said. With the complete attention he always gave his son when his son had a question, Siowa shifting slightly in his arms, her eyes beginning to drift toward sleep. Jum looked at his father, then at Mila on the sofa, then back at his father. "Before I was born," he said. "Did you marry my mother?" The sitting room held the question. The Han River moved outside. Hoseo looked at his son with the expression of a man who has been asked something direct by the most direct person he knows, and is going to answer it with complete honesty, because that is the only currency that has ever worked between them. "No," he said. "I did not." Jum nodded. He had known the answer. The question had not been a search for information, it had been the opening of a door, and the answer was the confirmation that the door was indeed open and he was going to walk through it. "Then," Jum said, with the measured unhurried certainty of someone who has thought about this carefully and arrived at a conclusion that seems to him entirely obvious, "I think you should consider it." Hoseo was very still. "Consider," he said. "Marrying her," Jum said. "Making it official." He paused. "You said yes when I told you to come to the hospital." You said yes when I said she should come home with us. You are good at saying yes to the right things. Another pause. This is another right thing. The sitting room was entirely quiet. Mila was looking at her son, at this boy in his navy suit who had just told his father to marry her with the same tone. He used to report that the hospital coffee was terrible, factual, sincere, entirely without performance. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were very bright. Jum, Hoseo said quietly. Yes. You are 7 years old, Hoseo said. Yes, Jum said. And I have been paying attention for all 7 of them. He looked at his father directly. She is your river, Daddy. She is where you left her. She has not moved. The Han River moved outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, slow and permanent and entirely itself. Hoseo looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at Mila. She was looking at him with dark almond eyes that were very bright and full lips that were pressed together, and the specific expression of a woman who has just heard her son describe her as a river, and is not going to recover from it quickly and does not particularly want to. Is he always like this? She said. Always, Hoseo said. Good, she said softly. Do not let anyone change it. Nobody could, Hoseo said. Jum looked between them with the patient expression of someone who has made his case and is waiting for the adults in the room to catch up. Well, he said. Think about it. And he picked up the cartography book and sat back down and opened it and began to read. At 11, Mila found herself in the nursery. Not because Sioa needed her. Sioa was asleep on Hoseo's chest in the sitting room with the specific boneless trust of a baby who had conducted her assessment and rendered her verdict, but because she needed a moment in the room that had been arranged between midnight and morning by a man who did not announce what he was doing. She stood in the doorway the way she had stood in it the first time. The simple white crib, the small chest of drawers, the soft rug, the painting on the wall in the colors of early morning. She thought about Jum at 6 months old, about the morning she had left, about picking him up and holding him for longer than she should have because she had known that if she held him long enough she would not be able to put him down. She had put him down. And he had grown into someone who used cartography to explain strategic principles, and told his baby sister she had the right cheekbones, and told his father to consider marrying his mother because she was his river and had not moved. She had put him down to protect his life. He had grown up to rebuild hers. She felt the presence behind her before she heard the footstep. Hoseo. She had learned the specific quality of his presence in a doorway, the way it altered the atmosphere of a room in the particular way that certain people altered atmospheres without trying. She did not turn around. He gets it from you, she said. The directness. He gets the cartography from somewhere I have not identified, Hoseo said. She almost smiled. The copper pot, she said. Was that your mother's kitchen? Growing up? Yes, he said. She made coffee every morning in it. The same way. Standing at the counter. I did not know that when I used it, Mila said. I know, he said. It felt right anyway. She turned. He was standing in the doorway with his white linen shirt and his dark trousers and his morning hair and his dark intense eyes that were looking at her the way they had been looking at her since a hospital corridor 3 weeks ago, with the specific quality of a man who has found something he lost and is not going to make the mistake of being careless with it again. Hoseo, she said. Yes. Your son told you to consider something, she said. Yes, he said. He did. And, she said. He looked at her. I considered it, he said. In approximately 4 seconds, which is 3 seconds longer than it needed. Mila looked at this man in the doorway of the room he had arranged between midnight and morning. Ask me properly, she said. When you are ready. Not now. Not in a nursery doorway. When, he said. When Jum is at that table with his book, she said. And Siwa is doing whatever she has decided to do that day, and the Han River is outside the window, and the copper pot is on the counter. That is a very specific set of conditions, he said. Yes, she said. It is. She walked toward the doorway. Toward him. She stopped when she was close enough that the morning light from the nursery window fell across both of them equally. Hoseo, she said quietly. Yes. The answer is already yes, she said. I just want the question asked properly. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. She walked past him into the corridor. She stopped. And then she did something she had not yet done in all of this. Not on the street, not in the hospital room, not in the safe house kitchen, not in 3 weeks of the same apartment. She turned around and she walked back to him and she put her arms around him and she held on. Not dramatically. Not with the performance of a reunion. Simply and completely, the way you hold something you thought you had lost and discovered you had not, the way you hold something that held its shape while you were gone. He put his arms around her. The nursery was quiet behind them. The Han River moved outside the windows. And that was that. The hug lasted exactly as long as it needed to, which was longer than either of them had planned and shorter than both of them wanted, and precisely the right duration for two people who had been standing on opposite sides of a 7-year distance and had finally closed it completely. When Mila stepped back, she looked at Hoseo for a moment, at the white linen shirt and the morning hair and the dark eyes that had just held her without requiring anything of the moment except to be in it, and then she straightened the collar of his shirt with one hand. Lightly. The way you touch something to confirm it is real. The copper pot, she said. Yes, he said. Tonight, she said. All 4 of us. The Han River. The book. The pot. Tonight, he confirmed. She walked down the corridor. He stayed in the nursery doorway for a moment longer, looking at the painting on the wall in the colors of early morning that he had hung between midnight and one morning, and then he followed. Jum was at the kitchen table when Mila came back. Not the cartography book this time. He had moved to something else, a slim volume about ocean navigation that he had apparently located in the apartment bookshelf and decided was a natural next step from cartography, which Mila was beginning to understand was simply how his mind worked, one territory leading naturally to the next, knowledge accumulating the way rivers accumulated tributaries, quietly and without announcement until suddenly the river was very large. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her face. He read it the way he read everything. And then something happened in his expression that was not the professional composure, and not the strategic certainty, and not the corner of the mouth movement that was the cousin of a smile. It was simpler than all of those. It was a 7-year-old boy understanding that something he hoped for had just moved from the category of possible into the category of real. He set the book down. He stood up. And Mila, who had been walking toward the counter and the copper pot, stopped. She turned. She looked at her son standing beside the kitchen table in his navy suit with his hands at his sides, and his dark serious eyes holding the most open expression she had seen on his face since the night he had looked at Soa in the hospital bassinet, and been genuinely surprised past all his defenses. She crossed the kitchen. She crouched down to his level, all 5 feet 9 inches of her folding to meet him where he was, the ivory wrap blouse and camel trousers and the loose dark hair, coming down to her son's height for the first time, and she opened her arms. Jum stepped into them, and she held her son. For the first time since he was 6 months old, and she had held him for longer than she should have on the morning she left because she knew that if she held him long enough she would not be able to put him down. She was not putting him down this time. She held him with both arms completely and her face pressed against the top of his neatly combed dark hair, and she felt him. This person. This specific, extraordinary, serious, careful person who had grown from 6 months old into someone who knew cartography and ocean navigation and the difference between the careful version and the true version, and had stood between her and danger on a dark street without knowing who she was, felt him put his arms around her too. Not hesitantly. Completely. The way he did everything. The kitchen was very quiet. The Han River moved outside. Hoseo stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his son and the boy's mother holding each other in the morning light. And he did the thing he had been doing since he was a young man, learning that some feelings were too large for the face and needed somewhere else to go. He breathed through it. Quietly. Completely. When Mila finally straightened, when she stood back up to her full height and looked at Jum, who was looking back at her with his dark eyes entirely clear and his navy suit slightly compressed at the shoulders from being held, and not one other thing about him disheveled because he was constitutionally incapable of dishevelment, she put one hand briefly on his cheek. One hand. One moment. Then she let go. Ocean navigation, she said, nodding at the slim volume on the table. After cartography, he said. It seemed logical. And after ocean navigation, she said. He considered this. I have not decided yet, he said. But I am thinking about architecture. Of course you are, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. She smiled back at him. A full smile, unheld. The kind that arrived on her face when something was simply good and she was not managing it. And then she went to the copper pot and the morning continued. Hoseo asked her properly at 7:40 in the evening. All the conditions were met. Jum was at the kitchen table with the ocean navigation book. He had moved from the sitting room to the kitchen at some point in the afternoon and nobody had directed him there. He had simply migrated, the way he migrated toward whatever surface suited the current book. Sioa was on the sitting room rug on a soft blanket, awake and conducting her daily examination of her own hands, which she had recently discovered and found endlessly compelling. The Han River was outside the window in the last warm gold of the evening. The copper pot was on the counter, the small flame beneath it steady and blue. Mila was at the counter. She was in the deep ivory wrap blouse still, the camel trousers, the hair loose around her shoulders, and she was looking at the Han River through the kitchen window the way she had looked at it every evening since she came here, with the specific attention of someone for whom this particular view had become the thing she oriented herself by at the end of each day. Hoseo came and stood beside her. He reached past her and turned off the small flame beneath the copper pot. She looked at him. "The coffee is not ready," she said. "No," he said. "It is not." She looked at him for a moment. Then she understood. He reached into the pocket of his dark trousers. He had changed from the white linen shirt into a deep navy shirt at some point in the afternoon, simple and precise, and the combination of the navy shirt and the dark trousers and the roll to the elbow sleeves was the most quietly handsome she had seen him in all of this, and he produced a ring. Not large. Not dramatic. A slim band of dark gold with a single stone that caught the Han River evening light and held it, the color of the river itself at this specific hour, warm and deep and permanent. He held it in his hand. He looked at her. "Mila," he said. "Yes," she said. Very quietly. "You know what I am going to ask," he said. "Yes," she said. "Ask me anyway," she said. "I want to hear it." He looked at this woman, at the deep rich brown skin and the high cheekbones and the dark almond eyes that had been making decisions since she was 24 years old and had never yet made a wrong one when it mattered most, at the loose dark hair and the ivory wrap blouse and the cream-heeled boots that she wore the way she wore everything, like she had always known they were hers, and he said, "Marry me." Not a question exactly. A declaration with her name already in it, and the answer already assumed by a man who knew her well enough to know what she was going to say, and was asking anyway because she had said she wanted to hear it. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it. At the dark gold catching the Han River light. At the view through the kitchen window that she had been orienting herself by every evening. "Jum," she called. From the kitchen table the sound of a book being set down. Footsteps. Jum appeared in the kitchen, ocean navigation book under his arm, dark serious eyes moving between his father and his mother and the ring on her finger and back to his father. He looked at the ring for a long moment. Then he looked at Hoseo. "Good," he said. One word. The same word his father used when things were exactly as they should be. Then he looked at Mila. "I told him," he said. "For seconds." "I know," Mila said. "He told me." "He should have told you sooner," Jum said. "Jum," Hoseo said. "Yes, Daddy." "Thank you," Hoseo said. "For telling me." Jum looked at his father. Something moved across his face. The specific warmth of a child who has been thanked for something he would have done regardless. By someone whose gratitude matters more than anyone else's. "You would have gotten there," Jum said. "Eventually." "Eventually," Hoseo agreed. "I simply accelerated the timeline," Jum said. With complete sincerity. Mila looked at her son. "Jum," she said. "Yes." She crouched down to his level again the second time today, and she understood this was going to become a habit, this specific fold of herself to meet him where he was, and she looked at him directly. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. The street. The hand. The hospital. The coffee. The cartography. All of it." Jum looked at her for a moment. "You are welcome," he said. Simply. Completely. The way he accepted everything without diminishing it and without making more of it than it was. "Then, also," he said, "the coffee tonight is going to be cold because he turned off the flame too early." Hoseo looked at the copper pot. Mila laughed. The full laugh, the one that came from somewhere real and arrived without permission. And Hoseo reached past her and relit the flame and Jum went back to the kitchen table and his ocean navigation and Sioa made a sound from the sitting room that was not distress but was the sound of a baby who had been examining her hands long enough and had opinions about the direction of the evening. And the Saturday continued. Warm and ordinary and entirely theirs. 18 months later. Jum was 8.5 years old. Sioa was 1. The wedding was not large. Mila had not wanted large. Large belonged to a different version of a wedding, the version that required an audience, that needed witnesses beyond the ones that mattered. She had spent years building things that the world could see. This was something she was building for the 4 of them, and the four of them were sufficient witnesses. The ceremony was in the apartment. The Han River through the floor-to-ceiling windows on a clear Saturday morning. The same kind of morning that had started all of this. The kind that arrived without announcement and sat down without requiring explanation. The furniture had been moved to the edges of the sitting room. Flowers, white and deep gold, and the specific green of the Han River in certain lights. Arranged by Ji-yeon, who had approached the task with the same composed precision she brought to everything and had produced something that looked like it had simply grown there. Beck was present in a dark suit that was slightly better than his usual dark suit, which was his version of formal, and he stood near the door with the expression of a man who had decided that whatever expression was appropriate for this specific occasion, he was going to find it and maintain it with the same discipline he brought to everything. Soo-yeon was there, sharp bob, clean framed glasses, charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, the expression of a woman who had filed the legal paperwork for this marriage with the same brisk efficiency she brought to all legal proceedings and was now present for the outcome with appropriate satisfaction. Mila wore ivory. Not white, ivory, the color of the wrap blouse from the Saturday morning, the color she had apparently decided was hers for the significant days. A structured floor-length dress with a neckline that framed her collarbones and sleeves that ended at the wrist and a skirt that moved the way the Valentino had moved, like water. Like something that understood its own nature completely. Her hair was down. Of course it was down. This was not a bun day. This was a hair loose around her shoulders day for every remaining day of her life if she chose it, and she chose it. A single piece of jewelry, the dark gold ring on her left hand that caught the Han River light the way it had caught it every evening for 18 months. Hoseo wore charcoal. His finest suit, the one that existed in a category beyond the deep charcoal almost black of the day of reckoning. The one that had been made for a specific occasion and had been waiting. White shirt. Dark gold tie, the color of the ring chosen deliberately. Dark shoes. His hair swept back with the precision of a man who had been precise about his hair for 39 years, and was not going to stop now. He looked at Mila when she came to stand beside him, and his face did the thing it did when he was feeling something too large for managing. The expression that broke through every layer of control for exactly one unguarded second before being gathered back in. She saw it. She always saw it. She had always been the person who saw it. Jum stood beside his father. He was in a new suit, the finest of the series, a deep midnight blue with a subtle sheen that caught the morning light, white dress shirt, a small dark gold pocket square that matched his father's tie and that he had apparently requested and arranged himself because of course he had, and he stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his back completely straight and his dark serious eyes moving between his father and his mother with the expression of a child who has been right about something important and is not making an announcement about it because the moment itself is the announcement. Seowa was held by Ji-yeon in a white dress with small gold buttons that Mila had chosen with the focused attention she brought to important decisions. Seowa was examining Ji-yeon's earring with the concentrated interest of a 1-year-old, who had recently discovered that other people's accessories were endlessly interesting and entirely available for investigation. The officiant, a quiet man in a dark suit who understood that his role today was to provide the legal architecture for something that had already been decided by a 7-year-old with a cartography book, read what needed to be read. Hoseo and Mila said what needed to be said. And then it was done. Not with drama. Not with the performance that weddings sometimes required of themselves, but with the specific permanence of two people who had found each other twice and were not planning on requiring a third opportunity. When the officiant confirmed what had just become official, Jum said, from his position beside his father, without being prompted, in the particular voice he used when stating facts that required no embellishment, "Good." Beck made a sound that was not quite a cough. Soo-yeon allowed herself a full smile, the first fully unguarded smile anyone in the room had seen on her face, and then composed herself immediately because she was a professional. Ji-yeon looked at Seowa and said quietly, "Did you see that?" Seowa released the earring and looked at her mother and father with the unfocused attention of a 1-year-old, and then looked back at the earring because it remained more immediately interesting. Hoseo looked at his wife. Mila looked at her husband. And Jum, 8.5 years old, midnight blue suit, dark gold pocket square, hands still clasped behind his back, looked at both of them and then at the Han River through the floor-to-ceiling windows and then back at his ocean navigation book on the table at the edge of the room where he had left it because even on a wedding day the book came with him, and then back at his parents and said, "Can we have the coffee now?" Mila laughed. Hoseo almost smiled. The Han River moved outside in the clear Saturday morning light, slow and permanent and exactly what it always was, and the copper pot went on the counter and the family moved into the kitchen together, And the morning continued into afternoon and the afternoon into evening and the evening into the particular kind of night that follows the days that matter. The kind you remember not because something extraordinary happened in them but because everything ordinary in them was exactly right. Jum read his book at the kitchen table. Sioa sat on the sitting room rug and investigated everything within reach with the focused determination of a 1-year-old conducting important research. Hoseo stood at the counter and made the coffee properly in his mother's copper pot. And Mila stood beside him, ivory dress, dark gold ring, hair loose around her shoulders, and looked at the Han River through the kitchen window and felt, for the first time in 8.5 years without qualification or condition or the awareness of a threat anywhere in the architecture of the feeling. Home. Simply that. Home. This is where the story rests. Not ends. A story like this does not end. It simply reaches the place it was always walking toward and sits down. Jum found her on a dark street. He stood between her and everything coming for her. He called his father. He held her hand. He told his father she was his river. He asked for the coffee. And somewhere in all of that, in the pinstripe suit and the hospital corridor and the cartography book and the 4 seconds and the dark gold pocket square, a family that had been separated by fear found its way back to the same kitchen. That is the whole of it. That is everything. To our viewers, from the very first moment you press play on episode 1, and watched a 7-year-old boy in a charcoal pinstripe suit turn a corner on a dark soul street, you chose this story. You stayed through the hospital corridor and the safe house kitchen and the intercepted call and the crossed-out list and every cliffhanger that kept you up at night. You felt it when Jum put his hand on Mila's. You felt it when Hoseo said I have missed you without the careful version. You felt it when Mila said yes, one word, the whole answer. And you are here now for the coffee and the copper pot and the Han River and a 1-year-old investigating Jiyen's earring and an 8.5-year-old in a midnight blue suit asking for coffee at his parents' wedding. Thank you. Not the polite version of thank you. The whole thing. You gave Black Silk Stories a home by watching, by commenting, by sharing, by telling someone you need to watch this. Daddy, I found them. Series is complete. But Black Silk Stories is not. There are more stories, more families, more dark streets and unexpected corners, and people who find each other in the middle of impossible circumstances and hold on. Afro-Korean stories that hit different. Stories that live in your chest long after you finish watching. Subscribe. Stay close. Tell everyone. Because what comes next is going to be worth being here for. Black Silk Stories. We are just getting started.